Hi everyone, hi teacher. Today I'm going to talk about language and brain chapter 12. Let's start with my outline. I will talk about these terms. Let's start with language areas in the brain. There are several areas of the brain that play a critical role in speech and language. There's a term in here, neurolinguistics. It is the study of relationship between language and the brain. It's called neurolinguistic. And here we have Broca's area, Wernicke's area, the motor cortex, and arcuate fasciculus, and localization view. Let's start with Broca's area. Broca's area, located in the left hemisphere, is associated with speech production and articulation. Damage to this part of brain is related to extreme difficulty in producing spoken language. Language ability must be located in the left hemisphere, and then we can say that Broca's area is crucially involved in the generation of spoken language. Wernicke's area, damage to this part is related to extreme difficulty in speech comprehension. This area is close to the part of brain, auditory cortex, that process what we hear. Wernicke's area is about speech comprehension difficulties. Broca's area is about speech production and articulation. These two things are really different. This area is close to the part of the brain, auditory cortex, that process what we hear. Wernicke's area is part of the brain crucially involved in the understanding of spoken language. Let's move with motor cortex and arcuate fasciculus. It generally controls movement of muscles. Motor cortex is close to the Broca's area, controls the articulatory muscles of face, jaw, tongue, like that. And what about the arcuate fasciculus? It is the other name of these things, curved bundle. It is known to form a crucial connection between Wernicke's area and Broca's area, as we can see from the first picture. What about the localization view? Localization of brain function simply means that different areas of brain are associated with different behaviors and mental processes. Having identified these four components, we can conclude that specific aspects of language abilities can be accorded specific location in the brain, and this is called localization view. Let's move with tongue tips and slips. The tip of the tongue phenomenon, what's that? For example, a person cannot remember a familiar word, but can remember words of similar form and meaning. It is failing to retrieve a word or term from memory. Let's move with slip of the tongue. Another type of error is commonly described as a slip of the tongue. A slip of tongue is a mistake in speaking, usually trivial, sometimes amusing. It means error in speaking in which speaker says something unintentionally when you mean to say something but instead say something different. For example, lamp of K. Example, a newsreader made a slip of tongue when reading out the scores. He said Chelsea is a football team, had lost by a goal, instead of saying they had won by a goal. Slip of the brain. In simple terms, we can call it Freudian slip. Is a verbal or memory mistake linked to the unconscious mind. Simply, it's a word substitutions as a familiar. Is a verbal or memory mistake linked to the unconscious mind. It has many sub-branches: preservation, anticipation, exchange. What's preservation? Sound carried over the next word. For example, such as my favorite funk. as we can see from the example, F carried over the next word. Anticipation. Sound used before the next word, such as top of T. Sound T used before the next word. Exchange. Initial sounds change places, such as Bill Fetter. As you can see from the example, initial sound B change places. Slip of the ear. It means an error in speaking in which the speaker says something unintentionally. It is the misperception of intended speech signal, such as when speaker says great tape, the someone can understand it as a great app, but the correct one is great app. For example, my uncle has a pimple, then listener can understand it as a pitbull. Let's move with aphasia. Aphasia is defined as an impairment of language functions due to the localized brain damage that leads to difficulty in understanding or producing language. The most known causes of aphasia is stroke. There are three types of aphasia: Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, conduction aphasia. Broca's aphasia. Aphasia is the loss of ability to understand speech or communicate using language. It can occur when areas of brain responsible for language become damaged. In this aphasia, motor pattern and grammar structure cannot be conducted, and thus the speech is impaired. We need to focus on these two things: motor pattern and grammar structure. People who have this illness cannot say a word intentionally. When someone says let's go, say it again, then a person who have this illness cannot say it, cannot repeat it. For example, walk dog, meaning I will take the dog for a walk, or book two table, for there are two books on the table. Wernicke's aphasia. Wernicke's aphasia is characterized by impaired language comprehension. It's hard to understand a person who has a disorder and communicate. Someone suffering from disorder can actually produce very fluent speech. For example, you know that Smoodle Pinkert and that I want to go. It's really hard to understand people who have these illnesses. Conduction aphasia. It is associated with damage to arcuate fasciculus and is called conduction aphasia. Sometimes words can be mispronounced. They are fluent but may have disrupted read because of pauses and hesitations. Individuals suffering from this disorder sometimes mispronounce words, as I said before. They are fluent but may have disrupted rhythm. Comprehension of spoken word is normally good. However, task of repeating a word or phrase creates major difficulty. For example, if I ask to say the word refrigerator, the patient might say regulator until they can say the word correctly. Dichotic listening. An experiment technique that has demonstrated a left hemisphere dominance for syllable and word processing is called dichotic listening test. It is the auditory process that involves listening with both ears. If anything happens on the right hand of the body, then we can say that it is processed in the left hemisphere. If anything happens on the left side, it's processed in right hemisphere, the opposite one. It is one of the most common techniques used to determine the hemispheric lateralization. The critical period. During childhood, there's a period when the human brain is most ready to receive input and learn a particular language. This is sometimes called sensitive period for language acquisition, but is more generally known as the critical period. Critical period for a language acquisition lasts from birth until puberty. If children do not acquire language during this period, then they will find it almost impossible to learn language later. As you can see from the pictures, there are some periods that this person speaks a language, and this is called critical period. Thank you for listening to me. That's all.